everybody, and thank you for joining the PAMIC webinar, The Art of Insurance Loss Communication in the Digital Age, presented by Andrew Siffert, Vice President and Senior Meteorologist, Catastrophe Analytics at ESRI. My name is Brittany Milnick, and I'm the Director of Communication and Technology here at PAMIC, and we are excited to provide you with another educational webinar. Just a reminder, we have all of the materials for this webinar, including the video of the presentation relisted under the Event Materials tab on our website, which you can view after the event has concluded. I would like to remind everyone that there is credits attached to this webinar, so if you would please answer the polls that pop up sporadically throughout the webinar itself and answer those with the appropriate answers, we will then proceed to give you the credits that are included. I would like to begin by thanking our platinum sponsors, and without them we could not have such successful educational programs. Our sponsors are Baker Tilly, Donegal Insurance, Jen Ree, Guy Carpenter, Markham, Munich Re, Hartford Steam Boiler, Mutual Boiler Re, Pennsylvania Lumbermen's Mutual, Swiss Re, and Willis Re. So before we begin this presentation, I just want to give you a little bit of information on the speaker. Andrew Siffert, who is the Vice President and Senior Meteorologist with ESRI, the U.S. Catastrophe Analytics team. He works closely with clients to help them manage their weather-related risks by adding value through catastrophe response, catastrophe modeling, product development, and scientific research and education. He has 17 years of industry experience, having worked in the energy and insurance industry, focusing on meteorological knowledge and helping companies manage their weather risks. Prior to joining BMS, Andrew worked with Flagstone Re as a CAT project manager, meteorologist, and was responsible for developing live CAT products, frontline research, and analytics used in underwriting process. He has also worked at ACE Group with the development of ACE Global Weather Insurance products and helped pioneer the weather derivatives market and energy trading markets while working at Aquila Energy Corp. Andrew has educational background that spans the sciences with a master's degree in meteorology from the University of Utah and was a member of the 2002 Olympic Weather Support Team. So without further ado, I will hand over the presentation to Andrew, and he will tell you a little bit more about the art of insurance loss communication in the digital age. Andrew?
Okay, Brittany, well, thanks for that great introduction, and I want to thank PAMIC for the great opportunity to allow me to present on the art of insurance loss communication in digital age. I'm pretty passionate about this subject. I think you'll get that by the end of the next hour here or so. I look forward to any questions at the end of this presentation. The presentation today will be set out in kind of two different sections. First section, I kind of want to really just talk about the importance of loss communication and why it is important across the insurance industry. And then lastly, we'll get into the fun stuff of kind of giving away some of my trade secrets and how you can actually use digital information to present a different way of communicating losses to respective organizations. So with that being said, we'll kind of just dive into it here in the sense that, as Brittany mentioned, that I work as a meteorologist and I work in the catastrophe modeling industry, representing and responding to, for insurance companies, responding to catastrophic losses. And in doing that, really I feel like I've been doing it now for, well over a decade. And in that decade, there's been really no change in how we go about the process of estimating insured losses or going about a way of understanding where the damage may be. So I really think there's a need to take advantage of digital technologies to improve this catastrophic response process within the insurance industry. And again, I'm going to share some of my secrets of how I've brought in some digital technologies to do that here today. So really, I want to start out the presentation looking at the social world and the social media world and how fast it can spread. So what we're actually looking at here is a timeline of green dots that are showing up on the map. And these green dots are actually starting to form what it looks like is the outline of the United States. And with a highlight of a lot of green dots are now starting to show up along the eastern seaboard. But as we move forward in time, as this movie is playing forward in time, we're seeing more and more green dots maybe show up in parts of mainland Europe, and even now starting to see a lot more dots even show up in Australia, Asia, even South America. And And what you're actually seeing then is a map of the world with a bunch of green dots. And even taking the point like southern Arizona and Florida, and what we're actually seeing is tweets. And this is of Hurricane Sandy as it was rolling up the east coast of the United States. And that's why maybe you're seeing a lot of tweets coming out of Arizona, Florida, because a lot of people have family back in those respective places back in the Northeast. And we're seeing now as we move forward in time, less and less tweets are starting to show up on the map, because really we're looking at 5.3 million tweeters tweeted 14.4 million tweets. Yes, that's a tongue twister, and what a way to start off a webinar. Over the 5-day period starting October 25th through November 7th. And this is in reference to Hurricane Sandy. But really, actually, what we're looking at that make up this map is really just about 158,000 of those tweets were actually geotagged. So just even a small fraction of those were actually geotagged tweets that allow a person to show where they actually tweeted that from, which is important as we get in the presentation here later today. So with that being setting the stage, I think there's a lot of valuable information that we could have gotten or we can get out of the social media aspect of things, and we'll talk about that in today's presentation, because we need to remember when a disaster happens and strikes, people generally have two options. They're going to stay or they're going to flee, but I can guarantee you, no matter what type of disaster is, they're going to try to grab their phone and take that with them, because that's their lifeline, right? And this is exactly why Verizon and AT&T, other mobile carriers, in times of disasters, go and set up these mobile devices that provide, Wi-Fi hotspots or cell phone hotspots and cell phone charging, right? Because the disaster areas might not necessarily have power, so these facilities have generators to help people connect with their loved ones, or most importantly, potentially with their insurance agent or a carrier to say, hey, my property is underwater, or I just had some type of damage and I want to report it before they can even maybe get back to their house. So I think that's really important to remember as we kind of go through the presentation today. But as Brittany actually introduced me, I do want to say that I do have a problem, and the problem is really I'm addicted to social media in some sense. That in the 7 days in dealing with catastrophe response for Hurricane Michael, I was on my phone and social media for a total of 23 hours, which is about 13% of my time during that 7-day period. And here's just a battery snapshot over here to the right of my usage, and I wasn't lying on that. And so I have to admit I have a problem, but this problem really helps me with my job. And I hope by the end of this webinar today that we'll kind of show you to how you can utilize digital information and social media to help with your job. But I also want you to think about these two questions. Do you inform clients and stakeholders of catastrophes? And if you do, I think you're attending the right webinar, and hopefully we'll give you some tools to use. And I guess the other question is, do you use social media at all? And if you do you use it to gauge the severity of catastrophic event? And I think we'll be able to answer both of these questions and provide some insight by the end of the presentation today. So as we get started, I just want to first, as I mentioned, talk about catastrophic loss and our catastrophic response process. Right? The first thing we need to think about is this process is often unexpected, right? We don't come into our day-to-day job thinking, oh, I'm going to be doing cat response, or, sometimes we do, but it's often, it's not routine. It's not something we often do on a day-to-day basis. So this automatically produces uncertainty, not only with just the overall process, but just the events themselves are all very uncertain, as we'll talk about. And they pose a threat to, high priority goals and image, right? So when I look back to the last 2 years as a meteorologist and catastrophic analyst, I look back at my goals of what I was supposed to accomplish the last couple of years, and I'm like, well, I didn't accomplish what I really intended to that year, because I spent up most of the time dealing with two different very active hurricane seasons. And the posing the threat to reputational images is not only personal, but it also potentially to your company, right? I mean, in times of catastrophe, people are vulnerable, and they're going to maybe say something about insurance companies that you want to mitigate that risk and serve the customers as much as possible, right? Because they're needing as much help as they can as they go through a life-changing event potentially. So this really actually creates a lot of opportunities, I think, dealing with catastrophic response. But I think there's some challenge. I think there's one thing you need to think about when we deal with catastrophic response in the digital age is I think we really need to leave our comfort zone. So in doing that, we need to be like kind of this guy in this girder, just putting themselves out there. Leave your comfort zone because, again, catastrophic response is not something we do every day. It can be a lot of uncertainties involved with that. So coming up with these loss estimates and where the damage is particularly can be quite complex, and projecting these catastrophic losses can be very difficult, right? Because we need to think about these catastrophic risk models that CAT analysts like myself use every day are not built for these real-time analysis. They're not built for a particular event to occur. They're built to better understand what is the likelihood of a particular event occurring and what the loss might be. It's not going to have that specific event built inside of it. And when we think about these, why catastrophic loss is so difficult, we can just look back at the last few hurricane seasons here since 2017 and just look at the wide range of losses that come out of different catastrophe risk models. And the overall, even looking at what the range of losses from the property claim services has been for those losses. So there's a lot of uncertainty because when we look at the losses, there's questions that need to be answered. Does the loss include the National Flood Insurance Program? Is there direct or indirect BI implications of that loss? Something we don't necessarily think about, hazardous waste, that's something that's not modelable. The vandalism and unfortunately the civil commotion that can come out of some disasters, or we think about like the peril side. Sure, it's a hurricane, but within a hurricane there's actually can be tornadoes, and that's definitely not part of the modelable loss that can potentially add more damage to the overall loss estimate. So there's a lot of uncertainties in itself in dealing with projecting catastrophic losses from catastrophic risk models that then need to be communicated, and making sure you communicate all the right numbers and what's in that loss estimate is very important. So I want to just say, estimating the economic loss, if the insured losses are really difficult with a lot of uncertainties, the economic loss has to be just as difficult. In fact, I would say that the economic loss, almost producing estimates for economic loss is almost reckless. There's just so many more nuances when you think about the economic loss that you need to take into account, and there's so many more variables. We often hear about the protection gap, which is the amount of insurance versus what wasn't insured, and we talk about how that's potentially growing with time. But when you think, I think that's again needs to be taken with a grain of salt, because economic losses I think are very difficult to produce. To truly understand what the true economic loss of a particular event was or events is very difficult. When you think back to Hurricane Katrina in 2005, I would very much argue that I think Hurricane Katrina is actually still seeing economic loss from that event as people have moved away. How do you really quantify the overall aspects of something like that? It's nearly impossible. So with that, I think it's just just really another way to think about economic losses and versus insured losses can be quite difficult, and that can lead to also misleading information in their press, and we really don't truly know the extent of economic losses. And with these, there's a lot of key uncertainties in estimating, as I just talked about, but I think we are getting a little bit better in that sense that with our catastrophic risk models now, we're coming up with, abilities to produce these wind fields at the time of landfall for specific events, as we're seeing from a modeling company here, RMS, and providing probability exceedance curves around it, which is going to say, okay, yeah, there's a potential loss of 60 billion, but there's only a 10% chance of that happening. So adding value to that in that sense is actually pretty valuable. And really producing these detailed footprints is becoming much more easier. So we are seeing some advances of how we produce catastrophic loss estimates in producing these highly detailed wind footprints, which has gotten a little bit better over time. So how are these losses, as we kind of conclude the loss segment of why losses are important, well, how are the losses being used across different segments of the insurance and reinsurance industry? So losses are important in the sense that we need to understand the losses and where the damage is occurring because of reinsurance, right? Reinsurance is the very first mechanism that is going to help customers, insurance clients, get money that they need to pay the insured, right? That's going to help them get their feet back on the ground. So the understanding of where the losses occur is very important. And then that might even be used to notify the reinsurer of the loss to say, hey, I'm going to need that money, but also saying, hey, I'm going to need more coverage because we just started the hurricane season, or we just started the severe weather season and I already have a lot of loss potentially. So buying these top-up covers or third event covers is important. On the claim side, we haven't mentioned much about that at all, but where to place claims adjusters. There's a lot of different types of claims. There's, high-touch claims, medium-touch claims, and low-touch claims. If you can place the right types of adjusters with the type of damage, that can be pretty important as well. And are you going to need more to engage third-party adjusters? And then, of course, there's the various notifications across different business parties inside and outside of a particular organization that are going to definitely want to know what they're dealing with in terms of a catastrophic event. On the reinsurance side, not to dwell too much on this, but there's different trigger mechanisms now that are getting more and more useful or more and more common in terms of industry loss warranties. And then there's products called LiveCat that, the buying and selling of reinsurance products in real time. And then again, the various notifications that need to go out. Why is this kind of important? When you look at the loss estimate, they can in fact for public companies, it can affect the stock price. So here we're actually looking at the stock I just pulled up in just a general stock ticker of what the price happened in 2017 during which is basically Harvey, Irma, and Maria, and the different times of when that storms made landfall and how the overall price of a particular stock of a insurance or reinsurance company was affected. And as you can see, that can drop quite a bit in terms of stock price, and that's important because that's the capital that is used to potentially pay back again claims that are going to be filed. So I think this is why it's important to properly convey not only internally but externally of how you think the event is going to unfold and how bad it might be to to limit some of that downside risk. Because we see examples where loss and numbers are abused. This is just one example here where I'm showing the insured loss from Hurricane Irma in Miami could be $200 billion. I mean, they don't put a percent around that. We don't see any type of range. And if you actually dive to where this number came out of, I think it was through actually the Insurance Insider maybe publication, but it basically comes from a guy who was kind of quoted as a disaster modeler through a particular researcher agency, was actually using Kinetic Corp, which is kind of a newer catastrophic risk model, but it's wasn't necessarily one of the more mainstream ways to go, right? In terms of how you potentially could convey the loss that could occur, and this scared a lot of people. It scared a lot of the insurance industry. And sure, was it possible? At one point in time, it was, but it was still a fairly rare, low probability of event. But this really got the media's attention. And again, as I was saying, you got to be careful of how you convey that number, you know, in terms of not using just one final number and where the loss potentially is, but also the tail loss, you know, and how it represents the tail of a particular event. And, you know, does it have what losses, what types of variables are within that loss? So we see now in our digital world that, you know, it is important to come up with a pretty accurate loss estimate and understanding where the loss is going to occur. But I also think, you know, we can't take too long, right? So if we have an event like Hurricane Ike in 2008, where a particular company comes out and gives a loss range, and then over a month later doubles that loss amount, that's not very useful in the sense that as an insurance company, you can already tell where in today's day and age, because people leave their catastrophes with their phone in their hand, they're going to provide, you know, you with a really good estimate. And so I think there's a fine line in how, you know, how much time you have to really react and provide proper guidance to people that actually people that actually need it internally. So with all that being said about the catastrophic risk law and loss, and why it's important in the insurance industry, I kind of want to shift gears a little bit and talk about my communication secrets and how I use digital information to come up with better catastrophic loss estimates and understanding of how severe an event might be. So as I step through that, the first thing I want to say is you can't get up in the in the hype. You know, I'm actually proud to say that during a lot of the major hurricanes or severe weather events, I don't watch the TV. It's just too much. There's too much drama. You know, it's best to kind of find a couple sources that you trust and go with it. Because if you start following different media types, you really can be overwhelmed. And I think that's my first trade secret is don't get caught up in the hype, but also don't get overwhelmed. You got to almost desensitize yourself from a particular event, because some of the things you might see on social media and across the media are disturbing, right? And it could automatically spur something internally that says, okay, well, hey, this looks really bad because I've seen one particular image. Well, let's use social media. Let's use different types of digital information to keep a level head and get a sense of order of what you actually need to know within your organization. So, but it really all starts with smartphones, and you know, we're almost pretty much worldwide at smartphone saturation, in the sense that the areas that have the technology and the infrastructure in place, a lot of people have cell phones and smartphones, and you know, obviously this number will grow as parts of Africa and developing countries become more you know, technological, or they get the communication systems up and running. But even in parts of, you know, Central Africa, I mean, cell phones are actually they're very common, right? So even though they might not even have electricity there, they have a cell phone. So it's pretty amazing the amount of information you can get worldwide from these mobile devices now, and I think we need to harness that. And I think a lot of my examples here today will kind of prove that and how we can use that today. But I think when we have a lot of caveats and that we need to think about when we're using social media and where we're getting our information in the digital age. Because I like this quote from Mark Twain. It says, "A lie can travel halfway around the world while truth is put in its shoes." And I think that's very true. And in fact, this is actually backed up by some recent research from MIT, in the sense that basically they studied some information, and they found that the false news is actually spreading more rapidly on social networks like Twitter than the real news does, and by a substantial margin, right? So this is kind of concerning immediately of what is what is the true news and what is, I guess, you know, the term that's been used is a lot of fake news. So I think we need to keep that in mind, but I think there's ways I'm going to show to kind of sift through some of that false information and how to get the best information here. Because I think part of it starts with there's an endless supply of fake imagery, and this image looks, really interesting, really familiar. But as you can see, it's very easy to doctor imagery in the sense that that's the number one issue where we see with social media is the prolific use of fraudulent old photos or misrepresentation of photos in real time. So the next few slides, we'll kind of step through some of these examples of different photo hoaxes. And there's basically the repurposing of photos. There's a misrepresentation of photos and saying that, okay, well, this tornado was a tornado and it's really just a low-hanging cloud, for example, or altered photos or hoaxes, and then staged photos. So I'll kind of just run through, maybe the best way is just kind of run through some of these examples of the endless supply of fake imagery out there. This is one of my favorite weather photos, actually, that's quite old. This actually was in American Meteorological Society pre-publication print of the severe storms, local severe storms conference, and actually October 1993. But to this day, I still use this photo or see this photo on social media because it's easy to say, oh, look at this photo that not often I took, but somebody, a friend, or I got from my grandma or uncle of this tornado last night, because it's really hard to tell where it is because it's dark. And it's actually a really cool photo, but it's very easy to just send this across social media to get likes and gratification to that manner, right? Because a lot of people are on social media because they feel gratified when they get the likes and people are talking about it and it kind of goes viral, right? So I think we have some of that going on here, and this is a prime example of why people share these fake imagery. You know, probably the most famous shark photo on Earth is right here. This shark, I mean, let me tell you, this shark has been through Hurricane Matthew. It's been through Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Florence, even just recently in Hurricane Michael. And it gets a lot of action in terms of like 140, almost 150,000 people were liking this photo, or at least 100,000 people were talking about this shark in Hurricane Harvey. But actually, this is an easy, again, doctored photo that actually came from a 2005 issue of African Geographic, where it's actually quite scary. This shark is actually chasing this sea kayaker, somewhere off the coast of Africa. So, but again, this is this type of thing that you might see on social media that you just kind of got to take a grain of salt, maybe figure out where the true source of that imagery is. Being in the insurance industry, hail is actually pretty damaging, right? In fact, the IBHS suggests that 70% of severe weather damage actually comes from hail. We're seeing a lot more hail damage occur in the insurance industry. So using social media to get ideas of the type of hail that fell can be pretty useful, and I'll show some examples at the end of the presentation that kind of go through this. But when we look at this, we see a pretty large hailstone potentially, right? And the sense that this is the size of a person's hand, right? So it's at least probably 4 inches big, which would be, state record in some Northeast states for sure. But this is actually out of a television station in Wichita, Kansas. So it'd be even pretty close to a state record in anywhere in the Central Plains. But we see some things in this image that looks like a balloon appendage, right? So maybe they filled a balloon and filled it with ice and then froze it. But immediately, if it's a fresh hailstone, right, which we'd like to see, there should be wetness on this hand. Or it's not even melted yet, for that matter. In a hail size of this size, there should be some dirt or grass at least, if it was a fairly fresh hailstone, and obviously maybe they washed it in this sense. But if you look actually after this hailstone was posted, there's actually a guy who just says, haha, kind of got you. We took this from a trainer's ice bin, and it was just a compressed ball of ice. So it literally wasn't real. It kind of got everybody going. So we have the anatomy basically of a hail picture here. We also see some newer photos. So you take an old photo, which is really easy. You take a nice dual tornado picture here in Nebraska in 2014, and I just basically crop that, zoom in, and it looks like a totally different picture, right, of a potential tornado that it could have happened yesterday, for that matter. We don't know. but it's pretty easier to do these types of fake photos across the internet. But so I've painted a pretty negative picture thus far of why you don't want to use social media and media crossing information, but there's tools to help us, right? So that's why I'm here to help and share my insights. So I don't know how many people have also used Google reverse image search, which allows people to go through, download the image, upload it, and Google's actually using their AI technology in the background to say, okay, where else have I seen this type of image? And if they have, they're going to actually post that to say, okay, well, this is a hoaxed image, or this is also the image that was used back in 2013, etc. So there's those type of tools that are out there that I highly recommend that you use once in a while to help you kind of get through all the bad that's out there. But social media and cat response is really nothing new. In fact, the USGS, which monitors earthquakes across the world, really has been a leader of using kind of social information and crowdsourcing information for quite a while. In fact, the late 1990s, the early 2000s, they came out with basically, did you feel it? And this is an opportunity for people to go on the World Wide Web or now on a mobile device and put in how they felt a particular tornado felt to them, right? So you're actually getting real-time information of, in this example here, the Anchorage earthquake that occurred on November 30th, right? And so we get in the Northeast in Pennsylvania, Virginia, we can get earthquakes. So this is an opportunity to quickly not only look at the damage scales coming out of the earthquake risk models from the USGS, but also what are people actually feeling on the ground? Where is the worst of the damage that they're actually seeing and feeling that can allow you to quickly mobilize the proper personnel to get in the right location. So this is just my one earthquake example that I have. Another area is just crowdsourcing. Here we're actually looking at Zurich, actually tweeting out to say, hey, please share your photos of the storm impact, right? So we have big and large commercial insurers like Zurich using this technology, and how they might be using it is they're actually looking at photos to say, hey, are any of our commercial properties in these locations of the disaster impacted by the storm, so we can get a better idea of what those customers might need. So these crowdsourcing platforms are popping up after particular events. So this is just after 2018 hurricane season, where we have these photos, and you might not know, but actually when you take a photo with your iPhone, sometimes it can be geotagged. There's something called metadata in the background, which has the date that maybe a photo was originally taken, the state it was maybe modified with the iPhone. You can put, different image textures to the photo, etc. So there's a lot of metadata information that goes into these photos, and on part of that, it actually has geotag locations of where that photo is actually taken. You can actually go on your iPhone and actually see back where all your photos were taken in your photo library. I don't know if you know that or not, but it's really cool. But you can actually go into these crowdsourced images and their geotagged photos and group together. So you can actually say, hey, do I have risks in this particular area where that photo is taken, to better understand what potentially the insureds are going through, or how bad the event might be. So I highly recommend you to kind of search out maybe like the gscorps.org, who set up some of these crowdsourcing photos for future events. And it can be not just for hurricanes, but it can also be for other severe weather events, tornadoes, hailstorms, earthquakes. Flood is a really big concern too within the insurance industry, and a growing concern. We're seeing that there's real-time risk maps for flood, right? And this is all about traffic, right? So it has nothing really necessarily to do with the insurance side, but you're actually using traffic information, where roads are closed, where people are actually going in and crowdsourcing, hey, this street has water in it, it's closed, you can't pass it. And if there's water in a particular street, particularly from Houston and Harvey, then there's potentially an area to say, well, I'm highlighting this area as there's potentially a lot of water damaging particular buildings, right? So you can, excuse me, look at the overall where you might have risks and the pinpoints of where your risks are, and kind of just visually represent where they would be within this particular map to get an idea of the worst flooded impact zones by just looking at road closures or like crowdsourced U-flood type products. So just thinking out of the box a little bit there of how to better understand in real time where the flooding is occurring without getting any information, right? Because a lot of times you can't get into a flooded area because, you know, of the road closures. But this isn't, all the things I'm talking about aren't just U.S. centric, right? This is a worldwide problem. We're seeing Jakarta in Indonesia is a very, you know, developing country, a lot of development going on, and they're very prone to flooding being in the tropics. So, you know, these types of sources exist, you know, outside of the U.S. as well to provide guidance overall. So I think this is a great opportunity to utilize mobile technologies. I think the other thing that we're seeing more and more of is the use of the geospatial technologies. So here we're actually looking at our my company's BMS iVision product, where we're actually looking at a detailed wind swath from Hurricane Irma as it moves up the East Coast or in through Central Florida. But this could be a hurricane that impacts like Sandy or Florence, or even just a new hurricane that hits New Jersey coast and goes into the Pennsylvania area. These highly detailed wind layers can be overlaid with potential policyholders to give a much more accurate view of where the highest winds were observed or for a particular risk. And these tools can be easily integrated with other data, such as imagery, to tell that story of where the overall impact is actually occurring, and then ultimately provide loss guidance for events. And this might not be just for hurricane events, as I'm showing here, but severe convective storm events with hail swaths or tornadoes that might occur in the Northeast as well. And part of this is produced, you know, some of this data is definitely free, right? So it doesn't need to be through a particular third-party vendor, as the BMS iVision product I just showed is, you know, some of this data is actually through ESRI, which is a global leader in geospatial technologies, and they've actually, you know, they're philanthropic in the sense that they've actually put together disaster response tools for hurricanes, tornadoes, and flood events, earthquake events worldwide to allow for easier visual representation and better decision-making processes during a crisis. And I think all this is, again, very free and available out there for any user to use, and there's great resources behind this that'll paint the picture of a catastrophic event that we can utilize to better communicate the magnitude of the event and the loss potentially. We're seeing more and more aerial imagery occur in our industry. You know, there's all sorts of data vendors now that are selling or providing. NOAA provides free aerial imagery after a particular catastrophic event. A lot of times for flooding events, hurricane and tornado events. And this is a great way. So you can overlay or pinpoint locations on these types of maps and quickly get an idea before you can even get an adjuster into the area, because there's so much destruction, there's power lines down, these sorts of things, and get people into these locations and just maybe using AI technology to say, okay, well, these types of structures are 100% damaged or 50% damaged, and even cut them checks and even limit the amount of need to really send in adjusters for particular properties. So it's really cool to use this new technology and digital information to make really quick decisions on how to help insurance customers. You know, I think live storm chasing is another thing that never really occurred to a lot of people for using, but it's prolific out there. In fact, I actually kind of like watching live storm chasing more maybe than Game of Thrones, but like we've seen in the last couple of days, there's been a lot of severe weather in the Midwest, and there's people out there that make a living off of this, or is this their hobby, and they actually put video cameras in cars, and there's GPS tracking on the car and the camera, in the sense that you can actually see where they are relative to the storm. So almost in real time, you can see the damage. So, and some of these storm chasers actually are first responders too. So after an event, they'll actually stop and drive through areas where people need it, because they're there, right? They're there taking the imagery. So if you see a particular storm cell, don't be afraid to look up Severe Studios and kind of see what's going on there, basically live as the event's unfolding. So I think you do have that technology that you could use to determine the actual damage, and for damage verification if you're seeing some of that. The other thing we don't think about as much is power outages, right? So there's power outages. If power outages, if there's a lot of power outages, that means there's likely a lot of properties that have been impacted by either tree fall or just the loss of power, and that can feed into the BI applications of implications of uninsured loss as well. So there's various products out there where they're actually predicting power outages ahead of time, or you can go to US power outages to really see the impact of a potential area. Because if there's likely a lot of people without power, areas without a lot of power, there's likely a lot of potential damage. So I think that's another source. And just a more detailed example of how you can use power outages might be in a tornado situation. And this could be anywhere. If you know your local utility in Pennsylvania or Mid-Atlantic, or this is a case with Entergy in Louisiana, I just knew that they're the main power provider. You can go and look at that very detailed, almost in real time. Again, a tornado goes through a particular area, that's going to show you the very detailed network of where the power outages are, and you can then take your geospatial map to that and overlay your pinpoints to get an idea, okay, what risk do I have in that particular power outage area where I think the tornado tracked, right? So you don't even necessarily need to follow the storm pages. It's actually the power map telling you where the tornado went and caused enough damage to take down the power grid in those particular areas. We also can't forget about our local governments, right? So local governments are there to help serve their community. This is just an example of during the Camp Fire out west, and this could be out east for that matter. The Pine Barrens in New Jersey are a very fire-prone area that could be or at high risk for wildfire. So we see that Butte County in this instance provided, basically very detailed imagery of damage estimates and impacted properties. And when you actually look at this imagery, you're seeing that, okay, there's Mary Insured's house. The house is no longer there. I'm verifying that the two houses behind it are okay. They're not really affected. That's actually verified by the image here. You can see the two houses in the background here are intact. So, again, it's very useful information to use and get a very quick estimate of your potential loss that could be occurring, for in this case, from a particular wildfire out in California. Facebook is actually going through and helping out with disaster mapping as well. I think it's important here to note, though, that they're actually taking data and they're de-identifying it, right? Some of the issues that Facebook has had, but they're basically taking that information, they're aggregating it into 360 square meter tiles. In this case, an event over Peru, and they're actually not looking at necessarily where they're looking at where people actually were communicating, and then where they actually ended up communicating, in the sense of where they're helping aid organizations show where the actually aid is needed. Because in a lot of catastrophes, right, people are moved out of that particular area, so they actually need to get the aid to the right areas, not the area where the event took place, but to where the people went. So again, I think there's some interesting information here. So that's in the case where you might want to actually send your disaster trailer to where the people are actually are and not to actually the area impacted, right? So there's that type of situation, just like we saw at the very beginning of the presentation with the mobile slide. So I think on social media, my big tips there, and I'm going to go through a couple of examples of Twitter as we close out the presentation here, is to, for Twitter, I think that the thing is follow the right people like me. I tweet a lot about catastrophic events and things I'm seeing. So you got to know the right hashtags and look for the geotag tweets for information as well. And use Twitters to take notes during a particular event. I do that quite a bit. So you can actually, save tweets. I don't know if, so you don't actually have to go back and try to search for them. But I think here's some just examples I'm going to step through where we look at Twitter, and you can actually set up and, different, groups. And here I actually have a bunch of other meteorologists I follow, and I follow what they're saying about a particular event, and they might tweet some relative information I can go through and find about that particular event that might be useful for helping with a damage loss estimate. And again, it's about trying to find out who the right people are to follow. It might be as simple as just going into your timeline for Twitter, and they have actually used, some technology to kind of filter through that content. What are people actually seeing a lot of, what to help you filter through where the potential damage is. And again, I think in all these imagery, it's important to look at this image. Okay, that's a Holiday Inn Express. Where's the geotag tweet? Okay, there's a particular street or near Pier 22. Do I have any risks near those locations to help me describe what type of damage I might be seeing from a particular tweet? I'm seeing a lot of tree fall. Okay, that means damage could be potentially much higher than the model suggesting or anticipating, because there's actually more tree fall than we were anticipating. So be mindful of hashtags and really pick the right type of content and filter. But I think the other tool a lot of people don't know about is the Twitter advanced search function, where you can actually put in particular hashtags or keywords or users, and actually even by dates and geolocation places to actually go back after a particular event occurred. It doesn't necessarily need to be in real time. You can use this years after the event to go and find relative information about a particular event or property that might have seen particular damage. So again, it's all about kind of knowing where your risks are and then tying the digital information into that. I'm actually a big fan of Snapchat, so a younger generation uses this. I'm not calling myself younger generation, but there's some really geotag snaps that is really informational here, in the sense that everything in Snap is automatically geotagged, where in Twitter you have to opt into it. So if I see a particular area of flooding on the news or something, I can go and verify that. New Bern here in Florence and in North Carolina, and actually can see, okay, I know where this is because it's geotagged, right? I saw the heat map. I have risks in that particular area. I can pick out maybe road signs or mobile home areas that I know are potentially impacted, and verify that through some of the imagery that I'm seeing. For Hurricane Michael, again, you can actually go and just select on the imagery, and again, they've went through and filtered. If I just hit Hurricane Michael, I can go and see, okay, I'm seeing, wood construction, roof off. I'm seeing potential, lot of tree damage, tree fall in particular. And again, it's very, everything is geotagged. If I know where that particular U-Haul facility is in reference to my insured properties, I might be concerned about, commercial type risk being impacted. But again, I just want to focus in, everybody around the world has smartphones. So it might be in Guam, where we saw a typhoon impact Saipan. So here you're actually looking at Saipan, where, the normal media is not going to get there right away to tell you the type of damage you're seeing. So we can actually use social media to gauge this information, halfway around the world or around the world, to get relative information on what you're seeing in terms of damage and the type of damage you're seeing, and to convey the proper messages to the stakeholders or parties that might be interested in knowing what the loss might be. So let's just step through one last example here as we close out the presentation. So this is an example where we're looking at hail, because again, hail is a big driver of insured loss. So we're looking at a radar imagery. This is just some radar imagery out of Dallas, Fort Worth. And, you know, the radar imagery is suggesting that there might be hail occurring in a particular area just north of Plano, Texas, and near Dayton. Or Denton, sorry, Texas. And so I'm just going to hop on social media and verify that. And I hop on Snapchat. I see my, just in this particular area, there's a lot of snaps occurring right where that hail swath went, just north of Plano. And, you know, I can even see, okay, yeah, it's verified. Everything is geotagged of what type, where that particular location is. And now that I showed you the anatomy of a hailstone, right, I see this person is holding hail. His hand is wet. There's actually dirt and grass on the hail, so I know it's fresh. And I'm verifying now that the radar is actually showing at least an inch and a half hail that could cause damage. And then from there, I can go into my geospatial tool and look at that hail swath going through that particular area, pull out my risk, my pinpoint risk, and apply a damage ratio, and really within minutes of a particular event, get a damage loss estimate of what I might be expecting from a particular event. So with that great example, and I just want to say we're at a paradigm where we're seeing a scientific information and social technological revolution over the last few decades, and it's really going to transform how we communicate risk and use information about hazards. This is also setting the stage for relationships, new relationships between science and technology experts in communicating the hazards in times of crisis. And this will ultimately change catastrophic response in the future, I think, as we more and more people adapt to some of these new technologies for conveying catastrophic loss. So in summary, I think you need to really find the facts. You know, there's a lot of false information out there, a lot of fake news, etc. But really make smart assumptions about event loss. They can be quite complex. There's a lot of uncertainties, and I think digital information can help limit some of those uncertainties. Be careful with the numbers. Again, there's a lot of uncertainties and really what's in some of the loss numbers you might be seeing or hearing. And effectively communicate the knowns and unknowns of events. And digital information and social media can help you paint a picture of what's known and what's not known about a particular event. Then gear your message for your audience or management of how they really need to know and what they need to know. So that being said, I'm just going to leave you with some of my contact information here. I'm happy to take questions here after, you know, at this time, and I really appreciate your time and attention. I really hope you got a new appreciation of how to use digital information for catastrophic response. So thank you for your time.
Okay, at this time now we will take questions. So thank you very much, Andrew, for giving us your expertise on this. And any questions we will take now. We do have a couple minutes for them.
Yeah, no worries. Don't be shy, but yeah, I appreciate the opportunity once again, and thank you for attending and taking your time. And I hope everybody today walked out of here learning something, and how maybe they can take it back to their respective workplaces and apply some of the things they learned.
Yes, and Andrew's contact information is on the screen and will be sent out after this webinar concludes. So again, thank you very much, Andrew, for helping us out with your expertise, and I hope to see everyone at the next PAMIC event or hear from you for the next webinar. Thank you very much.